The monitor's flatline scream pierced through the antiseptic silence of St. Mary's ICU at 3:47 a.m., and Maya Chen knew her stepfather's secrets were about to spill into the fluorescent-lit corridors like blood from a severed artery. She pressed her palm against the cold window, watching nurses flood Harold's room in a choreographed dance of emergency protocols, their voices sharp and urgent against the mechanical symphony of machines fighting for a life that had already slipped away. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Time of death, 3:52 a.m., Dr. Reeves announced, his voice carrying the weight of finality that Maya had been dreading for the past 18 hours. The man who had raised her since she was 7, who had taught her to change oil and negotiate salary raises with equal precision, was gone. But even as grief carved hollow spaces in her chest, something else stirred, a persistent whisper that Harold's final moments held more than just the end of his story. Maya's fingers trembled as she signed the necessary paperwork, her neat signature a stark contrast to the chaos of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The hospital hallway stretched endlessly before her, each step echoing with memories of Harold's booming laugh, his terrible dad jokes, and the way he'd always made her feel like she belonged in their patchwork family. Her mother, Linda, sat in the waiting room chair like a sculpture carved from grief, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled and her eyes staring at nothing. "Maya, honey," Linda whispered, reaching for her daughter's hand with fingers that felt like ice. I don't know how to do this without him." The weight of being the strong one settled on Maya's shoulders like a familiar coat. Detective Morrison arrived as Maya was collecting Harold's personal effects from the hospital room. The detective's auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes held the kind of sharpness that came from years of seeing through carefully constructed facades. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and a voice that carried authority without condescension. "I'm sorry for your loss, Ms. Chen," Detective Morrison said, her Irish accent barely detectable after decades in Boston. "I know this is a difficult time, but there are some questions about your stepfather's death that require investigation." Maya's blood chilled. "Questions?" The doctors said it was a heart attack. He'd been having chest pains for weeks, but he was stubborn about seeing doctors. "You know how men his age can be." "That's what we thought initially," the detective replied, pulling out a small notebook. "But the preliminary toxicology results show some irregularities. Nothing conclusive yet, but enough to warrant a closer look." The hospital room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in with implications Maya wasn't ready to face. Harold's reading glasses sat folded on the bedside table next to his wallet and wedding ring, ordinary objects that now felt weighted with significance. His leather messenger bag, worn smooth from years of carrying architectural plans and client contracts, sat in the corner like a faithful dog waiting for its master's return. "What kind of irregularities?" Maya asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Detective Morrison's expression softened slightly. "I can't share specific details while the investigation is ongoing, but I will say this. Your stepfather may have been involved in something that put him at risk. We'll need to search his home and office. With your permission, of course." Maya's mind raced through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. The idea that Harold could be involved in something dangerous seemed impossible. But then Maya remembered the phone calls, late-night conversations Harold would take in his study, his voice dropping to whispers when she or Linda entered the room. The way he'd started checking his rearview mirror more frequently during their Sunday drives. The new security system he'd installed 6 months ago, claiming it was just prudent given the rising crime rates in their Boston suburb. "Of course," Maya heard herself saying, "whatever you need to find out what happened." Linda agreed to stay with her sister for a few days while the investigation proceeded, leaving Maya alone in the house that had been her sanctuary for over 2 decades. The colonial-style home sat on a tree-lined street in Newton, its blue shutters and white picket fence presenting the picture of American suburban normalcy. But as Maya walked through the familiar rooms, everything felt different, like looking at a photograph of a place she'd once known rather than the home she'd grown up in. Harold's study occupied the back corner of the house, its walls lined with architectural books and framed blueprints of his most successful projects. His massive oak desk dominated the center of the room, its surface neat and organized in a way that had always impressed Maya. Harold was a man who believed that external order reflected internal clarity, a philosophy that had served him well in both his professional and personal life. Maya sat in Harold's leather chair, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with coffee and the faint mustiness of old books. She began going through his desk drawers systematically, looking for anything that might explain the detective's suspicions. Client files, project timelines, receipts for business lunches, everything seemed thoroughly mundane. It was in the bottom drawer, wedged behind a stack of old blueprints, that Maya found the envelope. Her name was written across the front in Harold's distinctive handwriting, not Maya or Sweetheart as he usually addressed her, but Maya Chen O'Sullivan in formal script. The paper was heavy stock, cream-colored and slightly yellowed at the edges as if it had been stored for some time. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing several typed pages that looked more like legal documents than a personal letter. The header at the top of the first page made her breath catch. Final instructions and testament, Harold Patrick O'Sullivan, to be opened only upon my death. Maya's eyes scanned the first paragraph, her comprehension lagging behind the words as their meaning sank in. If you are reading this, Maya, then the worst has happened and I am no longer able to protect you from the truth about who I really am and what I have done. I need you to know that everything I did, every choice I made, was to keep you and your mother safe. But my past has finally caught up with me, and now you must decide what to do with the knowledge I'm about to share. Harold had been designing buildings with hidden rooms and secure meeting spaces for criminal activities. But the revelation that made Maya's vision blur wasn't about Harold's professional compromises. It was about her biological father. Your father wasn't killed in an accident. He was murdered for evidence about a massive conspiracy. I've protected that evidence for 21 years. That time is now. Maya's hands shook so violently she had to set the papers down on the desk. The room spun around her as fundamental truths about her life crumbled and reformed. Her father, the father she had mourned and idealized, whose photographs sat in places of honor throughout the house, had been involved in something dangerous enough to get him killed. And Harold, the man she had trusted above all others, had been living with this knowledge for over 2 decades. She forced herself to continue reading, each page revealing layers of deception and danger she had never imagined. Harold detailed safe deposit boxes, encrypted files, and a network of contacts who could help her if she chose to pursue the truth about her father's death. He provided passwords, locations, and most importantly, instructions on how to contact someone named Agent Rebecca Torres at the FBI. Agent Torres has been waiting for this moment for 15 years, Harold had written. She was your father's contact before he died, and she is the only person in law enforcement I trust completely. If something happens to me, she will help you decide whether to pursue this path or let the truth die with me. The final page contains something that made Maya's blood run cold, a detailed list of names, dates, and financial transactions that appeared to document a massive money laundering operation. At the bottom of the page, Harold had written in his own handwriting, "They killed your father to keep this secret. I believe they may have killed me for the same reason. Trust no one except Agent Torres and Dr. James Way. He was your father's closest friend and the only other person who knows the full truth. The safe deposit box key is taped under the 3rd drawer of your mother's jewelry box. The contents will either set you free or put you in the same danger that claimed both your fathers. Choose carefully, my dear girl, choose wisely." Maya sat in the gathering darkness of Harold's study, the weight of 21 years of deception settling on her shoulders like snow. Outside, the familiar sounds of suburban evening continued. Children playing in yards, cars pulling into driveways, the distant hum of lawnmowers. But inside this room, her entire understanding of her life had been rewritten in the space of 30 minutes. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times, its familiar rhythm now seeming ominous rather than comforting. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How are you holding up, honey? The house feels so empty without him." Maya stared at the message, wondering how to respond. How did you tell your mother that her husband of 21 years had been hiding the truth about your father's death? How did you explain that the man they had both trusted and loved had been living a double life that might have gotten him killed? She decided she couldn't. Not yet. not until she understood more about what Harold had left her. Maya carefully folded the documents and slipped them back into the envelope. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory guiding her through the motions of tidying Harold's desk while her mind reeled with possibilities. She needed time to process, to decide what to do with this information. But she also knew that time might be a luxury she couldn't afford. As she prepared to leave the study, Maya noticed something she had missed before, a small notation in Harold's handwriting on the back of the envelope. It was a phone number followed by the words, "If you can't reach Agent Torres, call this number and say David Chen sent me. They will understand." The mystery of Harold's final message deepened with each revelation, and Maya realized that his death might have been just the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous story. She tucked the envelope into her purse and walked through the house one more time, seeing everything through new eyes. The family photographs that lined the hallway now seemed like evidence of an elaborate performance. Harold's collection of architectural awards took on sinister undertones. Even her mother's garden, carefully tended and full of flowers Harold had helped her plant, seemed to hide secrets beneath its orderly beauty. Maya locked the house and sat in her car for several minutes, trying to decide her next move. She could follow Harold's instructions and contact Agent Torres, beginning a journey into a truth that might destroy everything she thought she knew about her family. Or she could let the secrets die with Harold, preserving her mother's peace and her own sense of security. But as she started the engine and pulled away from the house, Maya knew she had already made her choice. The daughter of David Chen and the stepdaughter of Harold O'Sullivan couldn't walk away from the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. The evening traffic moved around her in patterns that suddenly seemed suspicious. Every car that followed her for more than a few blocks, every face that appeared twice in her rearview mirror, every unexpected phone call, all of it took on new significance in light of what she had learned. Maya drove aimlessly through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, trying to process the magnitude of what Harold had revealed. 21 years of lies built on a foundation of love, but constructed from deception. 21 years of living in ignorance, while the truth about her father's death remained buried beneath layers of carefully maintained normalcy. But what troubled her most wasn't the deception itself. It was the realization that Harold's death might not have been the natural conclusion to a life well lived, but rather the violent end to a story that was far from over. Maya spent the next morning in her downtown Boston office, trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy while her world crumbled around her. Her colleague, James Huang, knocked on her office door around 10 a.m., carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the concerned expression that had become familiar since Harold's death 3 days ago. James had been her closest friend since graduate school at MIT, one of the few people who understood the complexities of navigating multiple cultural identities while building a career in Boston's competitive financial sector. "You look like hell," James said, settling into the chair across from her desk with characteristic bluntness. "And before you tell me you're fine, remember that I've known you for 8 years. You have exactly 3 facial expressions when you're stressed: confused, determined, and terrified. Right now you're cycling through all 3. Maya managed a weak smile. James had always been able to read her better than anyone, a skill that had served them both well during late-night study sessions and early career crises. His parents had immigrated from Taiwan around the same time her father had arrived from Beijing, and they shared the particular perspective of first-generation Americans trying to honor their heritage while forging their own paths. "It's just, processing Harold's death is more complicated than I expected," Maya said, which was perhaps the most honest statement she had made in days, while also being woefully inadequate to describe her current situation. "Complicated how?" James asked, his dark eyes narrowing with the analytical intensity that made him such an effective consultant. "Did something happen with the funeral arrangements? I know Linda was struggling with the details." Maya hesitated, weighing how much she could share without putting James in danger. The rational part of her mind recognized that she was probably being paranoid, but Harold's warnings about trust echoed in her thoughts. If her stepfather had been killed for what he knew, then anyone she confided in might also be at risk. "The police are asking questions about his death," she said finally. "They think there might be something suspicious about the heart attack." James leaned forward, his expression shifting from concern to alarm. Suspicious how? Harold was in his 60s, overweight, and stressed about those big commercial projects. Heart attacks aren't exactly uncommon in men his age. That's what I thought too, but apparently the toxicology results showed some irregularities. Maya chose her words carefully, staying close to what Detective Morrison had told her without revealing the deeper implications she now understood. Irregularities like what? Drugs? Poison? James's voice dropped to a whisper despite the fact that her office door was closed. I don't know the details yet. The detective said they need to investigate further. Maya stood and walked to her window, looking down at the busy street below. Boston moved with its usual purposeful energy. Professionals hurrying between meetings, tourists consulting maps, students from the nearby universities flowing between classes. It was the same view she had observed hundreds of times, but today it felt like watching actors perform in a play she didn't understand. Maya, if someone killed Harold, you and Linda could be in danger too, James said quietly. Have you thought about that? She had thought about little else since reading Harold's letter, but hearing the concern in James's voice made the danger feel more immediate. The police didn't suggest we were at risk. They just said they needed to investigate Harold's activities. What activities? Harold designed buildings and coached Little League. What could he possibly have been involved in that would get him killed? Maya turned from the window to find James studying her with the same intensity he brought to complex financial models. She realized that her attempts at concealing what she knew were failing. James was too smart and knew her too well to accept her evasions. I think there might be more to Harold's business than any of us realized, she said, which was true enough to satisfy her conscience while still protecting the dangerous details. Before James could respond, Maya's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about it seemed familiar. She answered cautiously. Maya Chen? Yes. Who is this? My name is Dr. James Way. I believe Harold O'Sullivan left you something that mentioned my name. Maya's blood ran cold. This was the man Harold had identified as her father's closest friend, the only other person who knew the full truth. She gestured for James Huang to give her privacy, and he reluctantly left her office, closing the door behind him. Dr. Way, she said quietly, Harold mentioned you in his letter. Good. I was hoping he had prepared you for this conversation. I know this must be overwhelming, but we need to meet as soon as possible. Harold's death was not natural, and you may be in more danger than you realize. How do you know about his death? It just happened 3 days ago. Because I've been watching for signs that our old enemies had found us. Harold's death fits a pattern I've seen before, made to look like natural causes, but time to prevent him from completing something important. Maya's hands shook as she gripped the phone. What was he trying to complete? The work your father started 22 years ago. Harold was finally ready to bring your father's evidence to light, and someone killed him before he could follow through. What evidence? What was my father investigating? Dr. Way's voice carried the weight of decades of secrecy. Your father discovered a conspiracy involving some of the most powerful people in government and business. They were using a network of shell companies and offshore accounts to launder money from arms deals, drug trafficking, and human trafficking. The evidence he gathered could have brought down senators, judges, and corporate executives. Maya sank into her chair, the magnitude of what she was learning hitting her like a physical blow. And they killed him for it? They killed him, then spent years trying to track down the evidence he had hidden. Harold helped your father hide it, and then spent the next 2 decades protecting you and your mother while waiting for the right moment to act. Why now? What changed? Harold learned that they had finally tracked him down. He knew his time was running out, so he prepared everything for you to decide whether to continue the fight or let it die with him. Maya stared at her computer screen, where financial projections and quarterly reports seemed laughably mundane compared to the conversation she was having. Dr. Way, I'm not equipped for this. I'm a financial analyst, not some kind of investigator or whistleblower. You're your father's daughter, Dr. Way said gently. David was also just an accountant when he stumbled onto this conspiracy, but he had a sense of justice that couldn't ignore what he had discovered. I suspect you inherited that same moral compass. Harold mentioned an FBI agent, Rebecca Torres. Do you know her? Agent Torres has been working this case for 15 years, ever since she was a junior agent assigned to investigate your father's death. She's probably the only person in law enforcement who still believes the official story was a cover-up. Maya looked around her office at the diplomas and awards that represented her carefully constructed professional life. Everything seemed fragile suddenly, as if the revelation of her father's true fate could shatter the reality she had built for herself. Dr. Wei, if I decide to pursue this, what exactly am I getting myself into? A fight against people who have unlimited resources and no moral constraints. They've killed to protect this secret before, and they won't hesitate to kill again. But you'll also have the chance to get justice for your father, and potentially save lives by exposing their operations. Maya closed her eyes, trying to imagine what her father would want her to do. The David Chen she had grown up hearing about had been principled and brave, someone who always did the right thing, regardless of personal cost. But he had also been a father who would have wanted his daughter to be safe above all else. I need time to think, she said. Time is exactly what we don't have, Dr. Wei replied urgently. If they killed Harold because he was getting close to exposing them, they're probably already trying to locate the evidence he left behind. Every day you wait increases the risk that they'll find you before you can decide what to do. Where do you want to meet? There's a small cafe in Chinatown called Golden Dragon. It's owned by an old friend of your father's who can be trusted. Can you be there at 7 tonight? Maya looked at her calendar, filled with meetings and deadlines that now seemed insignificant. Yes, I'll be there. Come alone and make sure you're not followed. If you notice anything suspicious, cars that stay behind you too long, people who appear in multiple locations, anything that doesn't feel right, abort the meeting and call the number Harold gave you for emergencies. After Dr. Wei hung up, Maya sat in her office for 20 minutes, staring at the phone and trying to process what she had agreed to. She was about to meet with a man who claimed to have known her father, to learn details about a conspiracy that had gotten multiple people killed. It was like stepping into a thriller novel, except the consequences were terrifyingly real. James Huang knocked again and entered without waiting for permission, a habit that usually annoyed Maya but today felt comforting in its familiarity. Okay, that looked like a serious conversation, he said, settling back into his chair. And don't tell me it was about funeral arrangements because you looked like you were about to throw up. Maya realized she was at a crossroads that would define not just her own future but potentially her relationship with everyone she cared about. She could try to handle this alone, protecting her friends and family from knowledge that might put them in danger. Or she could trust James with the truth and risk dragging him into something that had already proven deadly. James, if I tell you something that could potentially put you in danger, would you want to know? His expression grew serious. Are we talking theoretical danger or real danger? Real danger, the kind that might get people killed. James was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the careful attention he usually reserved for complex financial analyses. Is this connected to Harold's death? Yes. And you're planning to do something about it regardless of whether I'm involved? Yes. Then I'd rather know what I'm dealing with than wonder why my best friend is acting like she's in a spy movie. Maya made her decision. She told James everything. Harold's secret letter, her father's real fate, the conspiracy that had been hidden for over 2 decades. She watched his expression change from skepticism to shock to grim determination, as the full scope of what she was facing became clear. Jesus Christ, Maya, he said when she finished. You're talking about taking on people who have been killing to protect secrets for decades. This isn't some financial fraud case. This is organized crime at the highest levels. I know, but Harold was right about one thing. I can't just ignore this. My father died for this information, and Harold spent 21 years protecting it. If I walk away now, they both died for nothing. James ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Maya recognized as his way of processing stress. Okay, so what's the plan? You meet with this Dr. Wei character, get more information, and then what? Go to the FBI, the media, start a blog about government conspiracies? I don't know yet. Harold mentioned an FBI agent who's been working the case for years. Maybe she can help figure out the right approach. Or maybe she's compromised too. If this conspiracy is as big as you're suggesting, they probably have people inside law enforcement. Maya had considered this possibility, but Harold's faith in Agent Torres had seemed absolute. Still, James was right to be cautious. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. "I have to start somewhere," she said. And Dr. Wei knew details about Harold's death that he couldn't have known unless he was legitimate. Or unless he's working for the people who killed Harold, and he's trying to draw you out. The thought chilled Maya, but she had already committed to the meeting. "Then I guess I'll find out tonight." James leaned back in his chair, his analytical mind clearly working through the possibilities. "If you're determined to do this, you're not going alone. And before you argue, consider that if something happens to you, I'm the only person who knows what you've told me. Your insurance policy is having someone else aware of the situation." Maya started to protest, but James held up his hand. "Besides, 2 people are harder to kill than 1, and I'd rather be paranoid together than wondering if my best friend is lying dead in an alley somewhere." Despite everything, Maya smiled. James's loyalty was one of the constants in her life, something she could count on even when her understanding of everything else was crumbling. Dr. Wei specifically said to come alone. Then Dr. Wei will have to adjust his expectations. "I'll stay outside the restaurant and keep watch, but I'm not letting you walk into a potentially dangerous situation without backup." Maya realized that she was grateful for James's insistence on involvement, even though it increased the risk to someone she cared about. The isolation of carrying Harold's secrets alone had been crushing, and having someone to share the burden with made the path ahead seem less impossible. They spent the rest of the afternoon making arrangements. James canceled his evening plans and researched the Golden Dragon restaurant, mapping out escape routes and identifying potential surveillance positions. Maya contacted her mother to check in, maintaining the fiction that she was simply dealing with grief and funeral logistics. As 7 o'clock approached, Maya found herself thinking about the different versions of courage she had witnessed in her life. Her father's courage in pursuing dangerous truths. Harold's courage in protecting his family while carrying deadly secrets. Her mother's courage in rebuilding her life after loss. Now it was her turn to discover what kind of courage she possessed. The evening was unusually warm for October in Boston, and Maya walked through Chinatown with heightened awareness of every face and sound around her. The familiar smells of restaurant kitchens and the chatter of multiple languages that usually made her feel at home now seemed like potential camouflage for threats she couldn't identify. The Golden Dragon occupied a narrow storefront between a shop selling herbal remedies and a small market specializing in imported goods. Maya paused across the street, scanning for anything that seemed out of place. James was positioned at a coffee shop 2 blocks away, close enough to respond if needed, but far enough to avoid being immediately connected to her. Dr. Wei was exactly what Maya had expected, a slight man in his 70s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, sitting at a corner table with a clear view of both entrances. He wore a simple black suit that suggested professional success without ostentation, and his hands rested calmly on the table despite the gravity of their meeting. "Maya," he said, rising to shake her hand, "you look very much like your father. He would be proud of the woman you've become." As they settled into their conversation, Maya realized that her journey into her father's hidden world was just beginning, and the choices she made in the coming days would determine not just her own fate, but potentially the lives of countless others whose stories were connected to the conspiracy that had already claimed too many lives. Dr. James Wei ordered tea with the practiced ease of someone who had conducted clandestine meetings in restaurants for decades. Maya watched him pour 2 cups, his hands steady despite the weight of the conversation they were about to have. The Golden Dragon buzzed with the typical dinner crowd, families sharing hot pot, business associates concluding deals over Peking duck, students from nearby colleges laughing over cheap noodles. The normalcy of it all made their discussion feel surreal. "Your father was my research partner at Harvard before you were born," Dr. Wei began, his voice low but clear. "We were both working on economic modeling for international trade, completely legitimate academic work. David was brilliant at finding patterns in financial data that others missed." Maya sipped her tea, the familiar jasmine flavor grounding her in the moment. Harold said he was just an accountant. He was, but accounting was David's second career. He had a PhD in economics and was working as a consultant for the Treasury Department when he stumbled onto something that changed everything. Dr. Wee's eyes swept the restaurant, checking for anyone who might be listening. A series of transactions that looked legitimate on the surface, but formed a pattern of money laundering on a massive scale. What kind of scale? Billions of dollars, moved through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. The money was coming from arms dealers, drug cartels, and human trafficking operations, then being cleaned through legitimate businesses and reinvested in everything from real estate to political campaigns. Maya felt sick. And the people behind this killed him when he tried to expose it? David was careful. He spent months documenting everything before he made any moves. But someone must have noticed his inquiries, because they moved against him before he could present his evidence to the FBI. Someone? Who exactly are we talking about? Dr. Wei leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. A coalition of people from different sectors, government officials, business leaders, organized crime figures, all connected by their willingness to profit from human misery. They call themselves the Helix Group, and they've been operating for at least 30 years. The name meant nothing to Maya, but the way Dr. Wei said it suggested decades of fear and careful research. How do you know all this? Because after David was killed, I became obsessed with understanding who was responsible. I spent years following money trails, connecting dots, building the case David never got to complete. And I wasn't the only one. Agent Rebecca Torres at the FBI has been working this case since she was assigned to investigate your father's death. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from James. 2 men in suits entered the restaurant after you. They're sitting near the back, not eating, just watching. Her blood chilled, but Dr. Wei continued speaking as if nothing was wrong. Harold helped your father hide the evidence before he was killed. Financial records, recorded conversations, photographs, everything needed to prove the conspiracy existed. Harold was supposed to turn it over to the FBI last week. Supposed to? He was getting nervous. Harold called me 3 days before he died and said he thought someone was watching him. He'd received some phone calls, noticed cars following him, found evidence that his office had been searched. Maya glanced toward the back of the restaurant and spotted the 2 men James had texted about. They were indeed watching her, making no attempt to disguise their interest. Both appeared to be in their 40s, professionally dressed, with the kind of alert posture that suggested law enforcement or security backgrounds. Dr. Wei, she said quietly, I think we may have company. He followed her gaze and immediately stood up. Leave through the kitchen. There's an exit that leads to the alley behind the building. I'll handle this. What about you? I've been doing this longer than you have. Go now. And don't look back. Maya didn't argue. She walked quickly toward the kitchen, hoping she looked like someone heading to the restroom, rather than fleeing from potential killers. The kitchen staff barely glanced at her as she wove between prep stations and walked out the back door into the narrow alley behind the restaurant. James was waiting for her, having anticipated that she might need an alternate exit route. Cars this way, he said, taking her arm and guiding her toward his Honda Civic parked at the end of the alley. What about Dr. Wei? He can take care of himself. Right now we need to get you somewhere safe. They drove in silence for several blocks before Maya trusted herself to speak. They found us. Somehow they knew about the meeting. Maybe Dr. Wei is compromised. Maybe they've been monitoring his communications. Or maybe they're watching you. The possibility that she was under surveillance made Maya scan the traffic around them nervously. Every car that stayed behind them for more than a few turns, every motorcycle that appeared twice in her peripheral vision, every pedestrian who seemed to be looking in their direction, all of it took on sinister significance. Where are we going? She asked. My apartment first, to figure out our next move, then probably somewhere more secure. James lived in a converted warehouse in the South End, a trendy neighborhood that attracted young professionals who valued exposed brick and high ceilings over space and parking. His loft was exactly what Maya expected: minimal furniture, expensive electronics, and architectural details that suggested successful urban living. But as they climbed the stairs to his third-floor unit, Maya noticed things that hadn't registered during previous visits. The placement of windows that provided clear sightlines to the street below, the reinforced door with multiple locks, the small security cameras that could be mistaken for smoke detectors. James had been more security conscious than she'd realized, which now seemed prescient rather than paranoid. "James, how long have you been worried about security?" He paused in the process of making coffee, his expression carefully neutral. "What do you mean?" "The cameras, the reinforced door, the strategic window placement. This isn't normal renter paranoia." James sighed and leaned against his kitchen counter. "Remember when I told you my parents immigrated from Taiwan? What I didn't mention is that my father was involved in pro-democracy activities before they left. He had some very dangerous enemies, and we've always been careful about security." "Are you telling me you've been trained for this kind of situation?" "Not trained exactly, but aware. My father taught me to notice surveillance, to vary my routines, to have backup plans. Skills that seemed outdated until about 3 hours ago." Maya realized that James's insistence on being involved wasn't just loyalty. He actually had relevant experience for the situation they were facing. The revelation was both comforting and unsettling, suggesting that the world was full of people living with hidden knowledge and carefully maintained secrets. Her phone rang, showing a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered on speaker so James could hear. "Maya, this is Agent Rebecca Torres. Dr. Wei gave me your number before they took him." "Took him? What happened?" "The men at the restaurant weren't there to watch. They were there to collect. Dr. Wei is alive, but he's in federal custody on what I suspect are trumped-up charges. We need to meet immediately." Maya looked at James, who nodded grimly. "Agent Torres, how do I know you're really FBI? How do I know this isn't another trap? Because if I worked for the people who killed your father and Harold, you'd already be dead. Harold gave me specific instructions to contact you if anything happened to him. He said to tell you that your father's favorite song was Danny Boy and that he used to sing it to you when you couldn't sleep." Maya's breath caught. It was true. Her father had sung that Irish lullaby to her countless times, a memory she had shared with Harold but never with anyone else. "Where do you want to meet?" "Boston Public Library, main branch, 3rd floor rare books section, 1 hour. Come armed with everything Harold left you. We're running out of time." Agent Torres hung up, leaving Maya and James staring at each other in the sudden silence of the apartment. "This is really happening," Maya said, the weight of the last few days finally hitting her fully. "People are being arrested. I'm getting calls from FBI agents. And somewhere out there are people who have killed to keep secrets that my father died trying to expose." James moved to his laptop and began typing rapidly. "If we're going to meet with this agent, we need to know who she is first. Basic background check, service record, anything that can verify she's legitimate." While James researched, Maya called her mother to check in. Linda sounded tired but stable, surrounded by her sister's family, and occupied with funeral arrangements that now seemed like a cover story for something much more complex. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" Linda asked. "You sound stressed." "Just processing everything. Harold left some business matters that need attention. He always was meticulous about his paperwork. I swear that man kept receipts from the Carter administration." Linda's laugh carried a note of fondness mixed with grief. "Maya, I know this is a difficult time, but I want you to know how proud Harold was of you. He used to say you had the best parts of both your fathers." The comment hit Maya like a physical blow. Linda had no idea how literally true that statement might be, or how dangerous those inherited traits could prove to be. "Mom, I love you. Stay safe, okay?" "Of course, honey. What could happen to me at your aunt's house? The biggest danger here is death by casserole." After hanging up, Maya realized that her mother's innocence was both a gift and a burden. Linda deserved to know the truth about the man she had loved for over 2 decades, but that knowledge would shatter her sense of security and potentially put her in danger. James looked up from his laptop with a mixture of relief and concern. "Agent Rebecca Torres, 15 years with the FBI, currently assigned to the Financial Crimes Division. Clean record, commendations for work on organized crime cases, no red flags in her background. Currently assigned to financial crimes, or currently assigned to investigating my father's case." The official records show financial crimes, but there are some gaps in her assignment history that suggest she might be working on special projects. Maya gathered Harold's letter and the documents he had left her, checking to make sure she had everything Agent Torres might need. The weight of the envelope in her purse felt disproportionate to its size, as if the papers inside carried not just information, but the accumulated weight of 21 years of secrets. The Boston Public Library felt like neutral territory, a place where information was freely shared rather than hoarded and protected. Maya and James arrived separately, having decided that appearing together might attract unwanted attention. Maya made her way to the third-floor rare books section, where the atmosphere was hushed and scholarly, populated by researchers and academics rather than the general public. Agent Rebecca Torres was exactly what Maya had expected from her voice, a woman in her early 40s, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that held the wariness of someone who had seen too much corruption. She wore a simple gray suit and carried herself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to authority, but there was something about her expression that suggested personal investment in the case beyond professional duty. "Maya," she said, extending her hand, "I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances. Harold was a good man who deserved better than what happened to him." They found a quiet corner between stacks of historical documents, far from other patrons and security cameras. Agent Torres opened a thick manila folder and began laying out photographs and documents that made Maya's stomach clench. "This is your father," she said, pointing to a surveillance photo of a man Maya recognized from family pictures. This was taken 3 days before his death, meeting with an informant who was providing information about Helix Group operations. Maya studied the photograph, seeing her father's face animated by purpose and determination. He looked younger than she remembered, and alive in a way that made his loss feel fresh and immediate. "Harold told me he was killed in a car accident." The accident was staged. David's car was run off the road by another vehicle, then the scene was arranged to look like he lost control. The investigating officers were either paid off or convinced that it was just an unfortunate accident involving a distracted driver. Agent Torres showed her more photographs, financial documents, meeting locations, lists of names that meant nothing to Maya but seemed to carry enormous significance for the agent. "Your father had identified the core members of the Helix Group and was building cases against all of them. Politicians, judges, corporate executives, organized crime figures, people who had never been in the same room publicly but were connected by this conspiracy. And you've been investigating them for 15 years? I've been trying to build a case that would stick. The problem with conspiracies involving powerful people is that they have the resources to discredit evidence, intimidate witnesses, and buy influence wherever they need it. David's evidence was the key to everything, but after he died, it disappeared." Maya pulled Harold's envelope from her purse. It didn't disappear. Harold hid it. Agent Torres opened the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, spreading the contents across the table between them. Her expression changed as she read through Harold's letter and examined the financial documents he had preserved. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. "This is everything. Bank records, wire transfer receipts, recorded conversations. Harold kept it all." Harold mentioned safe deposit boxes. There might be more. There had better be more, because what Harold has given you is enough to destroy some very powerful people, and they're going to do everything in their power to make sure this never sees the light of day. Maya watched Agent Torres photograph each document with a small digital camera, her movements quick and efficient, despite the magnitude of what they were handling. "What happens now?" "Now we build an airtight case before they realize how much evidence we have. That means following every lead, documenting every connection, and gathering enough corroborating evidence that they can't make it all disappear." Dr. Wei said there were recordings, conversations between conspiracy members. If those recordings still exist, they're either in Harold's safe deposit boxes or hidden somewhere else. We need to find them before the Helix Group does. Maya realized that she was now committed to a path that would consume her life for the foreseeable future. There would be no going back to her normal routine of financial analysis and weekend brunches with friends. She was now part of an investigation that had been decades in the making and might take years to complete. Agent Torres, what you're asking me to do? It's going to put my mother in danger, isn't it? The agent's expression softened slightly. Maya, your mother has been in danger since the day she married Harold. The only thing that kept her safe was Harold's willingness to stay quiet about what he knew. Now that he's dead and the evidence is surfacing, everyone connected to this case becomes a potential target. So our choice is to hide forever or fight back. Those are the only choices people like us ever have. Agent Torres packed up the documents and handed Maya a secure phone. Use this to contact me. Don't use your regular phone for anything related to this investigation. Assume all your normal communications are being monitored. As they prepared to leave the library, Maya felt the weight of heredity settling on her shoulders. She was her father's daughter, inheriting not just his sense of justice but his willingness to risk everything for the truth. She was also Harold's stepdaughter, shaped by his protective instincts and his understanding that some fights were worth having, even when the odds were overwhelming. The conspiracy that had killed her father and stepfather was about to discover that their victims had left behind someone who possessed the best qualities of both men, along with the determination to see their work completed regardless of the personal cost. Over the next week, Maya's life transformed into something that felt more like an extended training exercise for covert operations than the existence of a financial analyst. Agent Torres introduced her to a network of investigators, journalists, and former law enforcement officers who had been working various aspects of the Helix Group case for years. There was Detective Mike Sullivan, a Boston PD officer who had been suspicious about several accidental deaths involving potential witnesses. Dr. Sarah Kim, a forensic accountant who specialized in tracing money through complex international transactions. Marcus Thompson, a former CIA analyst who had identified Helix Group operations in 3 different countries. Each of them had pieces of the puzzle, but none had possessed the central evidence that Harold had preserved. Maya found herself at the center of a collaborative effort that spanned multiple agencies and jurisdictions, all focused on building a case that could survive the political and legal pressure the conspiracy would inevitably bring to bear. The safe deposit boxes Harold had mentioned yielded a treasure trove of additional evidence, audio recordings of Helix Group meetings dating back 15 years, photographs of transactions and document exchanges, financial records that connected legitimate businesses to money laundering operations, video footage of meetings between supposed enemies who were actually collaborating in criminal enterprises. But with each piece of evidence they uncovered, the danger to everyone involved increased exponentially. Maya's apartment was broken into, though nothing was stolen, a clear message that her activities were being monitored. James received anonymous phone calls warning him to, quote, convince his friend to be more careful about the company she keeps. Linda's sister reported seeing unfamiliar cars parked outside her house at odd hours. The psychological pressure was as challenging as the physical danger. Maya found herself unable to maintain normal relationships or routines, constantly aware that every conversation might be monitored and every movement tracked. The work consumed her thoughts during the day and haunted her dreams at night, filling her sleep with images of her father's last moments and fears about what might happen to the people she loved. But along with the fear came a sense of purpose that Maya had never experienced in her previous career. Every financial record they decoded, every connection they established, every piece of evidence they secured brought her closer to understanding who had killed her father and why. The abstract numbers and transactions she had worked with as a financial analyst now had faces and names attached to them, real people whose criminal activities had destroyed families and communities. Agent Torres proved to be a demanding but supportive mentor, teaching Maya how to think like an investigator while respecting her background in financial analysis. You see patterns in data that trained agents miss, she told Maya during one of their late-night working sessions. Your father had the same gift, the ability to look at a spreadsheet and see the human story behind the numbers. The investigation expanded beyond Boston as they followed money trails to New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and eventually overseas to accounts in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore. Maya found herself working with Interpol agents, Treasury Department investigators, and foreign law enforcement officials who had been tracking various aspects of Helix Group operations for years. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. The group had been involved in arms trafficking to conflict zones, drug smuggling operations that supplied major American cities, and human trafficking networks that moved people across international borders. The money they generated was being used to corrupt officials at every level of government, from local police departments to federal agencies. But the most disturbing discovery was how deeply embedded the conspiracy had become in legitimate institutions, banks that knowingly processed dirty money, businesses that served as fronts for criminal operations, political campaigns funded by laundered cash. The line between legal and illegal activity had been deliberately blurred to the point where distinguishing between them required forensic accounting and years of patient investigation. Maya's education in the darker aspects of American capitalism accelerated as she learned to read between the lines of corporate filings and government contracts. What looked like routine business transactions often concealed complex criminal enterprises. What appeared to be legitimate political donations frequently represented the laundering of money from drug sales or weapons trafficking. The emotional toll of this knowledge was offset by the relationships she developed with her fellow investigators. Agent Torres became something of a surrogate mentor, filling the guidance role that Harold had occupied in Maya's life. Detective Sullivan provided street-smart perspective on how criminal organizations actually operated. Dr. Kim taught her advanced techniques for following money through international banking systems. But it was Marcus Thompson who helped Maya understand the broader implications of what they were investigating. "This isn't just about solving your father's murder or getting justice for Harold," he told her during one of their strategy sessions. "The Helix Group represents a fundamental threat to democratic institutions. If people like this can operate with impunity, then the rule of law becomes meaningless." Maya began to see her role in the investigation not just as seeking personal justice, but as part of a larger effort to preserve the integrity of American institutions. The evidence they were gathering could expose corruption that reached into Congress, federal agencies, and major corporations. Success would mean more than just punishing the people responsible for her father's death. It would mean disrupting criminal networks that were causing harm around the world. But failure would mean that powerful criminals would continue operating without fear of consequences, and that future whistleblowers would know that speaking truth to power carried a death sentence. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and Maya found herself drawing on reserves of courage and determination she hadn't known she possessed. She was no longer just Maya Chen O'Sullivan, financial analyst. She was David Chen's daughter and Harold O'Sullivan's stepdaughter, carrying forward a fight that had cost both men their lives. The breakthrough came 3 weeks into the investigation, during a late-night session in Agent Torres's makeshift command center in a rented warehouse outside Boston. Maya was cross-referencing bank records from Harold's safe deposit box with transaction patterns Dr. Kim had identified when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. "Agent Torres," she called across the room, her voice tight with excitement and fear. "I think I've found the smoking gun." Maya had been analyzing a series of wire transfers that had seemed routine, payments from construction companies to architectural firms for building projects. But when she compared the amounts to the actual costs of the projects, there were systematic discrepancies that suggested money was being moved for purposes beyond legitimate construction work. "Look at this," Maya said, pointing to her laptop screen. Harold's architectural firm received payments for designing a warehouse in Baltimore that was never built. The construction company that hired him received the money from a shell corporation in Delaware, which got its funding from accounts in the Cayman Islands. Agent Torres leaned over Maya's shoulder, studying the financial trail she had uncovered. "How much money are we talking about?" "This single transaction moved $12 million. But it's not just one transaction. It's part of a pattern. Over the past 5 years, Harold's firm has been paid for dozens of projects that were either never built or built to specifications that don't match the architectural plans." Dr. Kim joined them, bringing her own laptop and the specialized software she used for forensic accounting. "Maya's right. This is a classic money laundering scheme, but it's more sophisticated than most. They're using Harold's legitimate business as a way to create paper trails for illegal transactions." Maya felt sick as the implications became clear. Harold wasn't just hiding evidence about the conspiracy. He was part of it. They were using his business to launder money. Not voluntarily, Agent Torres said firmly. Look at the dates when these transactions started. They coincide with when Harold first contacted me about turning over your father's evidence. Someone was pressuring him to participate. The revelation recontextualized everything Maya thought she knew about Harold's final years. His increasing anxiety, his reluctance to discuss work projects, his insistence on installing new security systems, all of it made sense if he was being coerced into participating in criminal activities while trying to find a way to expose the people controlling him. Detective Sullivan arrived as they were piecing together the full scope of Harold's predicament. "I've got news about Dr. Wei," he announced. "The charges against him have been dropped, but he's been moved to a safe house. Apparently someone tried to kill him in federal custody." Maya's hands shook as she absorbed this information. "Is he okay?" "He's alive, but whoever tried to get to him had access to the detention facility. That suggests the Helix Group has people inside federal law enforcement." Agent Torres cursed under her breath. "We always suspected they had government connections, but this confirms it. If they can reach targets in federal custody, then none of us are safe." The warehouse suddenly felt less secure, despite the multiple locks and alarm systems Agent Torres had installed. Maya realized that their investigation had moved beyond academic research into active warfare with people who had unlimited resources and no moral constraints. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Agent Torres announced. "Every day we wait gives them more opportunities to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence." Over the next 72 hours, the team worked around the clock to prepare their evidence for presentation to a federal grand jury. Maya found herself functioning on 3 hours of sleep and endless cups of coffee, driven by the knowledge that her father's killer might finally face justice. But the Helix Group wasn't passive during this period. Maya's mother called in tears to report that someone had broken into Harold's house, destroying everything in his study and stealing his computer equipment. James received a visit from 2 men claiming to be IRS agents who asked detailed questions about Maya's finances and whereabouts. Agent Torres discovered that her official FBI email account had been suspended pending an internal investigation into her unauthorized activities. The pressure campaign was clearly designed to isolate them and create doubt about the legitimacy of their investigation, but it also confirmed that they were close to something important enough to justify significant countermeasures. The first major revelation came when Dr. Kim succeeded in tracing the ultimate source of funding for the Helix Group's operations. Using advanced software and techniques she had developed during her time with the Treasury Department, she followed money through dozens of shell companies and offshore accounts until she reached the original sources. "It's worse than we thought," she announced during an emergency meeting at the warehouse. "The Helix Group isn't just a criminal organization. It's a network that includes sitting members of Congress, federal judges, and executives from Fortune 500 companies." She displayed her findings on a large monitor, showing a web of connections that resembled a spider's web of corruption. Names that Maya recognized from newspaper headlines and television interviews were connected to drug dealers, arms traffickers, and human smuggling operations through a complex series of financial transactions and business relationships. Senator Patricia Hawkins from Virginia has received over $2 million in campaign contributions from companies that are fronts for Helix Group operations, Dr. Kim continued. Federal Judge Marcus Reed has been getting consulting fees from law firms that represent Helix Group interests. And CEO Jonathan Blackwood of Meridian Industries. Maya's breath caught. "Meridian Industries? That's our biggest client at work." "They've been using your consulting firm to legitimize their financial activities. All those reports you've been preparing about international market conditions? They're being used to justify moving money to countries with bank secrecy laws." The realization that her own work had been unknowingly contributing to the conspiracy made Maya feel violently ill. For years, she had been providing professional analysis that helped criminals hide their activities behind a veneer of legitimate business operations. Agent Torres put a reassuring hand on Maya's shoulder. "You had no way of knowing. That's how these operations work. They use legitimate businesses and honest people as cover for their activities." But Maya felt the weight of unwitting complicity settling on her conscience. How many other people like me are there? Accountants, lawyers, consultants who think they're doing legitimate work but are actually helping criminals? Hundreds, probably thousands, Marcus Thompson replied. The Helix Group's genius is in creating layers of legitimate activity that make it almost impossible to distinguish between legal and illegal operations. The second major revelation came when Agent Torres received a secure communication from an unexpected source. Agent Rebecca Torres's counterpart in the Drug Enforcement Administration had been conducting a parallel investigation into Helix Group operations, focusing on their role in drug trafficking rather than money laundering. DEA agent Carlos Mendez arrived at the warehouse with boxes of evidence that complemented what they had already gathered. His investigation had identified Helix Group involvement in smuggling operations that brought cocaine and heroin into American cities, then used the profits to fund their other criminal enterprises and political corruption activities. "We've been tracking these operations for 3 years," Agent Mendez explained. "Every time we get close to the people at the top, witnesses disappear, or evidence gets suppressed by officials who claim to be acting in the interest of national security." "National security?" Maya asked. "That's the excuse they use to classify information and prevent prosecution. They claim that exposing certain operations would compromise ongoing intelligence activities or endanger foreign assets." Agent Torres's expression darkened. "In other words, they're using legitimate national security concerns as cover for criminal activity." The collaboration between FBI and DEA investigators revealed the full scope of what they were facing. The Helix Group wasn't just engaged in financial crimes. They were running integrated operations that combined drug trafficking, arms dealing, human smuggling, and political corruption into a single, enormously profitable enterprise. The evidence they had gathered painted a picture of systematic corruption that reached into every level of American society. Local police who were paid to ignore certain criminal activities. State officials who approved permits and licenses for businesses that were fronts for illegal operations. Federal agents who suppressed investigations that got too close to powerful interests. But the most disturbing discovery was the extent to which the conspiracy had infiltrated the justice system itself. Prosecutors who refused to bring charges despite overwhelming evidence. Judges who dismissed cases on technical grounds. Defense attorneys who shared confidential information about their clients with opposing interests. "This is why your father's case was never properly investigated," Agent Torres explained to Maya. "It's why Dr. Wei spent years gathering evidence that never led to prosecutions. The system is compromised at multiple levels." Maya felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were facing. How do we fight something this big? How do we expose corruption when the people responsible for investigating corruption are part of the conspiracy? "Very carefully," Agent Mendez replied. "And with help from people outside the system who can bring pressure to bear from different directions." That help came in the form of investigative journalist Sarah Martinez, who had been researching Helix Group activities for a major newspaper. Agent Torres had been reluctant to involve the media, fearing that premature disclosure might compromise their investigation, but the attempts to silence Dr. Wei and suspend her FBI email account had convinced her that they needed additional protection from public scrutiny. Sarah Martinez was a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter with a reputation for exposing government corruption and corporate malfeasance. She had been following financial trails similar to the ones Maya had uncovered, but from a different angle, focusing on how criminal proceeds were being used to influence American foreign policy. "The Helix Group isn't just stealing money," she explained during their first meeting. "They're using that money to shape government policies that serve their criminal interests, military interventions that create markets for weapons sales, immigration policies that increase demand for human trafficking services, trade agreements that facilitate money laundering." Maya realized that the conspiracy was even more extensive than they had suspected. It wasn't just about criminal activity. It was about using criminal proceeds to corrupt the democratic process itself. Sarah Martinez's investigation had identified specific instances where Helix Group money had influenced major policy decisions, campaign contributions that led to favorable regulatory changes. lobbying efforts that resulted in reduced law enforcement funding for financial crimes, political appointments that placed Helix Group allies in key government positions. The scary part is how legitimate it all looks on the surface, Sarah continued. Campaign contributions are legal. Lobbying is legal. Political appointments are how democracy is supposed to work. But when you follow the money back to its sources, you find that it's all been funded by drug sales, weapons trafficking, and human exploitation. The journalist's research provided the final pieces Maya needed to understand how her father had become a target. David Chen hadn't just discovered a money laundering operation. He had stumbled onto a systematic effort to corrupt American democracy using proceeds from international criminal enterprises. Your father was killed because he threatened to expose not just individual criminals but an entire system of corruption that has been decades in the making, Sarah Martinez told Maya. The people behind this have too much invested in maintaining the status quo to let it be exposed by an accountant from Boston. Maya felt the weight of her father's legacy settling on her shoulders. David Chen hadn't just been an honest man who tried to do the right thing. He had been someone who understood that the integrity of democratic institutions was worth dying for. What happens now? Maya asked. Now we prepare for war, Agent Torres replied. Because once we present this evidence, the Helix Group is going to use every resource they have to discredit us, intimidate witnesses, and suppress the truth. The team spent the next week preparing for what they knew would be the most important presentation of their lives. Maya worked with Dr. Kim to create clear, understandable summaries of the financial evidence. Agent Torres collaborated with Agent Mendez to coordinate their enforcement strategies. Sarah Martinez prepared her news articles for publication, timing them to coincide with any government action. But even as they prepared for success, they also planned for failure. Safe houses were identified for key witnesses. Evidence was duplicated and stored in multiple locations. International contacts were alerted to the possibility that American law enforcement might be compromised. Maya found herself at the center of preparations that felt more like planning a military operation than organizing a legal presentation. The stakes were too high and the opposition too powerful for them to rely on normal procedures and institutional protections. The night before their presentation to the federal grand jury, Maya called her mother to say goodbye, knowing that it might be the last normal conversation they would have for a long time. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," Linda said, though she had no idea what Maya was actually doing. "Harold always said you had the courage to stand up for what's right, just like your father." Maya realized that her mother had unknowingly described the essential truth about her situation. She was standing up for what was right, carrying forward the work that had gotten both her fathers killed, and preparing to face consequences that might include losing everything she had built for herself. But she was also part of something larger than herself, a network of people who had chosen integrity over safety, truth over comfort, justice over personal security. They were about to reveal secrets that had been protected by murder and maintained through corruption for over 2 decades. The next morning, Maya woke up knowing that her life would never be the same, regardless of how their presentation was received. She was no longer just seeking justice for her father's death. She was fighting for the soul of the country he had died trying to protect. Maya stood before the marble memorial wall in Boston's Government Center, reading her father's name among the dozens of government employees and contractors who had died in service to their country. The memorial had been established by Congress as part of the reforms that followed the Helix Group investigation, recognizing the sacrifice of whistleblowers who had lost their lives trying to expose corruption and criminal activity. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. David Chen's name was engraved in elegant script between a CIA analyst who had been killed for exposing arms trafficking and a Treasury investigator who had died after discovering money laundering in major banks. Below each name was a brief description of their contribution to government accountability and public safety. David Chen, accountant, Treasury Department contractor, died investigating international money laundering conspiracy. His evidence posthumously led to the prosecution of criminal organization responsible for trafficking, corruption, and murder. Maya touched the cool marble, thinking about how different her life might have been if her father had lived to complete his investigation himself. She would probably still be working as a financial analyst, living quietly in Boston, unaware of the criminal enterprises that operated behind the facades of legitimate businesses and government agencies. But she couldn't regret the path that events had forced her to take. The work she was doing with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and the David Chen Foundation had already helped expose 3 major corruption cases and provided protection for dozens of whistleblowers who might otherwise have faced the same fate as her father. Maya? She turned to find James approaching from across the plaza, carrying coffee for both of them, and wearing the slightly rumpled appearance that had become his trademark since leaving the corporate world. After losing his security clearance and consulting contracts, James had reinvented himself as an investigative researcher, using his analytical skills to support nonprofit organizations and independent journalists working on government accountability issues. "How was the meeting with Senator Richardson?" Maya asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Productive. She's committed to supporting the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act, and she thinks we have enough votes to get it out of committee." Maya smiled at the irony. Senator Patricia Richardson was the daughter of the Deputy Director Richardson, who had tried to recruit Maya into covering up the Helix Group conspiracy. After her father's arrest and conviction, Patricia had made government reform the central focus of her political career, driven by a determination to ensure that criminal organizations could never again infiltrate government agencies the way the Helix Group had done. "Any word on the Morrison case?" James asked. Maya nodded, pulling out her secure phone to check the latest updates from Agent Torres. 3 more arrests yesterday. It looks like the network was even bigger than we initially suspected. They had people in the State Department, Defense Department, and Treasury Department, all working together to facilitate arms trafficking to conflict zones. The Morrison case had been their most complex investigation yet, involving a criminal organization that was selling American military equipment to both sides of civil wars in Africa and South America. The profits were being laundered through American banks and used to corrupt officials who could provide even more access to military resources. Maya had been brought in specifically because of her experience with the Helix Group case. The financial patterns were similar, but more sophisticated, requiring analysis techniques she had developed during years of investigating how criminals used legitimate institutions to hide illegal activities. "Any personal threats this time?" James asked with the casual concern of someone who had learned to live with the constant possibility of retaliation. "The usual. Anonymous phone calls, cars following me home, threatening letters sent to my office. Nothing that suggests immediate danger." Maya had learned to manage the psychological pressure that came with investigating powerful criminals. She varied her routines, maintained awareness of her surroundings, and worked closely with law enforcement agencies that could provide protection when threats became more serious. But she also refused to let fear prevent her from doing work that she believed was essential to maintaining the integrity of democratic institutions. "Your mother called while you were in the meeting," James continued. "She wanted to remind you about dinner on Sunday." Maya smiled, thinking about how much her relationship with her mother had evolved since the Helix Group investigation. Linda had initially been devastated by learning the truth about Harold's secret activities and David's real death, but she had gradually come to understand the importance of the work Maya was doing. "She's been volunteering with the Foundation's Victim Support Program," Maya told James, "helping families of whistleblowers deal with the trauma and isolation that comes with standing up to powerful interests." Linda had found purpose in using her own experience to help others navigate the complex emotions that came with learning that loved ones had been living double lives in service of larger principles. Her work with Gold Star families, a term they had adapted to describe families of fallen whistleblowers, had given her a sense of meaning that honored Harold's memory while helping other people cope with similar losses. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Torres. "Morrison case breakthrough. Need you at FBI office ASAP. Bring financial analysis equipment." "Duty calls," Maya told James, finishing her coffee and gathering her materials. "Can you handle the Foundation board meeting this afternoon?" "Of course. Just remember that Dr. Kim wanted to discuss the new forensic accounting training program before you disappear into another investigation for weeks." Maya kissed James's cheek. Their relationship had evolved from friendship into something deeper during the years they had worked together on accountability issues and headed toward the FBI's Boston field office. The walk through downtown Boston had become routine, but she still found herself noticing details that most pedestrians ignored. Security cameras, escape routes, potential surveillance positions. The hypervigilance that had developed during the Helix Group investigation had never entirely faded. The FBI office buzzed with activity as Maya arrived. Agent Torres met her at the elevator, looking energized in the way she always did when a major case was reaching its climax. "We broke their communications system," Torres announced without preamble. Turns out, they were using an encrypted messaging platform that the NSA had been monitoring for counterterrorism purposes. "We got approval to access their records, and it's everything we needed to understand how the network operated." Maya followed Torres to a conference room where multiple agents were analyzing printed transcripts of electronic communications. The messages revealed the inner workings of a criminal organization that was more sophisticated than anything Maya had encountered, even in the Helix Group case. "Look at this," Torres said, pointing to a series of messages between individuals identified only by code names. "They're not just trafficking weapons, they're deliberately prolonging conflicts by supplying arms to both sides. The longer the wars last, the more money they make." Maya studied the communications, recognizing financial transaction references that corresponded to patterns she had identified in banking records. They're using the same money laundering techniques as the Helix Group, but they've added another layer of complexity by routing funds through military contractor accounts. "That's where we need your expertise. The financial trails are too complex for our usual forensic accountants to follow, but you've seen these patterns before." Maya spent the next 6 hours working with the FBI team to decode the Morrison organization's financial operations. What emerged was a picture of systematic war profiteering that extended far beyond simple arms trafficking. The organization was manipulating conflicts in multiple countries, bribing officials to prolong wars, and using the profits to corrupt American government officials who could provide even more access to military resources. "This is worse than the Helix Group," Maya told Torres, as they reviewed their findings. The Helix Group was motivated by profit, but they weren't actively trying to increase human suffering. These people are deliberately perpetuating wars because peace would hurt their business model. "How much money are we talking about?" Maya consulted her calculations. "Based on the transaction patterns I've identified, probably $5 billion over the past 8 years. And that's just what they've moved through American financial institutions." The scale of the Morrison organization's operations dwarfed even the Helix Group conspiracy. But Maya also realized that their investigation techniques had improved dramatically since her father's case. The international cooperation protocols they had developed, the forensic analysis methods they had refined, and the witness protection programs they had established were all products of lessons learned during the Helix Group investigation. "We're going to need coordination with at least 6 different countries to make arrests and seize assets simultaneously," Maya continued. "If they get warning that we're coming, they'll disappear the evidence and relocate their operations." Already in progress. Agent Mendez is working with Latin American authorities. Sarah Martinez is coordinating with European journalists, and we have preliminary agreements with banks in 12 countries to freeze suspected accounts. Maya marveled at how sophisticated their approach had become. The Helix Group investigation had been largely improvised, a desperate attempt to expose criminals before they could eliminate all the witnesses and evidence. The Morrison case was being handled with professional precision, using systems and relationships that had been developed specifically to combat international criminal organizations. But she also recognized the familiar pattern of escalation that had characterized her previous investigations. As their techniques improved, the criminals they were targeting became more dangerous and more desperate. The Morrison organization had already demonstrated its willingness to kill government officials who threatened their operations, and Maya knew that her own involvement would make her a high-priority target. "Agent Torres, I need to ask you something," Maya said as they prepared to leave the FBI office. "Do you ever regret getting involved in these cases? Do you ever wish you had just focused on routine financial crimes instead of taking on criminal organizations that have the resources to destroy your life?" Torres considered the question seriously. "Every time someone I care about gets threatened because of my work, I wonder if the cost is worth it." But then I think about all the people who are alive today because we disrupted trafficking networks. All the government officials who are in prison instead of taking bribes. All the potential whistleblowers who are willing to come forward because they know there are people like us who will protect them. Maya understood exactly what Torres meant. The work was personally costly and professionally dangerous, but it was also meaningful in a way that her previous career had never been. She was part of something larger than herself, an ongoing effort to maintain the integrity of democratic institutions against systematic criminal infiltration. 5 years later, Maya stood at the podium in Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, looking out at an auditorium full of graduate students who would soon enter careers in government service, law enforcement, and policy analysis. She had been invited to deliver the annual David Chen Memorial Lecture on Government Accountability, an honor that still felt surreal given how her father's story had ended. "My father was just an accountant," she began, using the opening line that had become her signature. "He wasn't trained in law enforcement. He wasn't an investigative journalist. He wasn't a professional activist. He was someone who discovered evidence of criminal activity and made a choice to prioritize truth over personal safety." Maya had delivered variations of this lecture dozens of times, at universities, government agencies, and professional conferences around the world. But each presentation felt personal, as if she was continuing a conversation with her father that had been interrupted by his death 28 years earlier. "The choice my father made, the choice that ultimately cost him his life, is a choice that many of you will face during your careers. You will discover evidence of corruption, criminal activity, or institutional failure that powerful people want to keep hidden. The question you will have to answer is whether you have the courage to act on that knowledge." Maya had refined her message over years of experience investigating criminal organizations and training other analysts to recognize patterns of corruption. The core truth remained constant. Democratic institutions could only function properly when individuals were willing to defend them against criminal infiltration, regardless of personal cost. Some of you are probably thinking that the cases I've described are extreme examples, that most of you will never encounter criminal conspiracies involving international trafficking and government corruption. But corruption rarely appears in such dramatic forms. It usually begins with small compromises, minor ethical violations, and gradual erosion of professional standards. Maya showed the students slides from her current investigation, a case involving municipal officials who were taking bribes from construction companies in exchange for favorable zoning decisions. The amounts of money involved were relatively small, and the immediate harm seemed limited, but the patterns were identical to those she had seen in much larger criminal enterprises. The difference between minor corruption and major criminal conspiracy is often just a matter of scale and time. The same mentality that allows someone to accept small bribes will eventually justify participation in larger criminal activities, if the financial incentives are sufficient and the risks seem manageable. After her lecture, Maya was approached by a young woman who introduced herself as Lisa Park, a second-year graduate student focusing on financial crime investigation. Lisa's questions were insightful and specific, suggesting someone who had already given serious thought to the ethical challenges of working in government accountability. "Professor Chen," Lisa said, "I've read about your father's case and the Helix Group investigation. What I don't understand is how you maintained hope during the years when it seemed like the criminals had more power than the law enforcement agencies trying to stop them." Maya recognized the question as one she had struggled with throughout her own journey. "I maintained hope because I saw evidence that the system could still work, even when it was under attack. Every honest investigator I worked with, every journalist who refused to be intimidated, every government official who chose integrity over convenience, they all proved that criminal organizations hadn't completely corrupted our institutions." "But what about the personal cost? You've lost relationships, faced constant threats, and had to rebuild your entire career. Do you ever wonder if the price was too high?" Maya thought about James, now her husband and partner in both professional and personal endeavors. She thought about her mother, who had found purpose in helping other families cope with the aftermath of whistleblowing cases. She thought about Agent Torres, Dr. Wei, and the dozens of other people whose lives had been permanently altered by their decision to fight powerful criminals. The personal cost was enormous, Maya acknowledged, but the cost of doing nothing would have been even higher. If we had walked away from the evidence my father died protecting, the Helix Group would still be operating. The Morrison organization would still be profiteering from international conflicts. Dozens of other criminal enterprises would know that they could operate with impunity as long as they were willing to kill anyone who threatened them. Maya realized that she was describing not just her own choice, but a choice that every generation had to make, whether to defend democratic institutions against corruption or to accept criminal infiltration as an inevitable part of political and economic life. The most important thing to remember, she continued, is that you're not fighting alone. There are people like us in every agency, every level of government, every sector of the economy. Some of them don't even know they're part of a larger movement. They're just individuals trying to do their jobs with integrity. But collectively, they represent the immune system that protects democracy from criminal infection. After the lecture, Maya walked across Harvard's campus toward the parking garage where James was waiting to drive her home. Cambridge in autumn reminded her of her graduate school days, when her biggest concerns had been completing research projects and finding entry-level positions in Boston's financial sector. Her life had taken a path she never could have imagined, but she realized that it had also fulfilled potentials she hadn't known she possessed. The analytical skills that had made her a competent financial analyst had made her an exceptional investigator of criminal enterprises. The moral courage she had inherited from her father and stepfather had enabled her to confront powerful criminals who intimidated other investigators. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Torres. New case briefing tomorrow, cryptocurrency manipulation involving foreign governments. Need your pattern recognition expertise. Maya smiled, recognizing the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that came with the prospect of investigating another complex criminal conspiracy. After 8 years of this work, she understood that each case would present new challenges and dangers, but she also knew that the work itself was essential to maintaining the integrity of the institutions that made justice possible. 10 years later, Maya stood in the cemetery in Newton, where Harold was buried, placing fresh flowers on his grave and reading the inscription she had chosen for his headstone: Harold Patrick O'Sullivan, architect, father, guardian of truth. He protected what mattered most. It was the anniversary of Harold's death, a date that had become a personal holiday for Maya, a time to reflect on how much her life had changed since that morning in the hospital, when she first learned that her stepfather's secrets were about to reshape her understanding of everything. Linda joined her at the graveside, moving with the careful precision of someone in her 80s, but still maintaining the dignity and strength that had sustained her through decades of hidden truths and public revelations. "He would be proud of what you've accomplished," Linda said, linking her arm through Maya's as they stood in comfortable silence. Maya looked around the cemetery, noticing how many of the newer gravestones belonged to people who had died in service to their country or their communities. Government employees, law enforcement officers, military personnel, and civilians who had made sacrifices for principles larger than themselves. "I've been thinking about retirement," Maya said, surprising herself with the admission. "Retirement from investigation work, or retirement from everything?" "Just from active field work. I'm 53 years old, and I've been doing this for over a decade. Maybe it's time to focus on training the next generation instead of personally confronting every criminal conspiracy we uncover." Linda smiled. "Your father and Harold would understand that choice too. They both believed in preparing other people to continue important work, not trying to do everything themselves." Maya realized that her mother was right. David Chen had trained other accountants to recognize financial irregularities. Harold had taught younger architects to design buildings with integrity and precision. Both men had understood that individual contributions were most valuable when they created capabilities that outlasted any single person's career. "Besides," Linda continued, "you and James are talking about starting a family. It's hard to chase international criminals when you're worried about getting home in time for school pickup." Maya laughed, thinking about the conversation she and James had been having about having children. They had delayed starting a family during the most dangerous years of their investigation work, but recent changes in their professional roles had made parenthood seem feasible for the first time. "Can you imagine trying to explain to a teenager why mommy can't talk about what she does at work because it involves classified criminal investigations?" I can imagine it perfectly, Linda replied. It's exactly the same conversation I had with you about why Harold sometimes had to work late on mysterious projects that he couldn't discuss. As they walked back toward Maya's car, Linda shared updates about her work with the Foundation's Family Support Program. The David Chen Foundation had grown into a major organization with offices in 12 countries, providing comprehensive support for whistleblowers and their families, while conducting research on government accountability and institutional reform. We've helped over 300 families navigate the aftermath of whistleblowing cases, Linda reported. And the Policy Research Division has contributed to reforms in 47 countries. Maya felt pride in what they had built from the ashes of personal tragedy. Her father's death had created a legacy that extended far beyond her own investigation work, providing practical support and institutional change that would protect future generations of people who chose truth over safety. But she also realized that the Foundation's success had created new responsibilities that required different skills than criminal investigation. Building sustainable institutions, managing international partnerships, and developing policy recommendations demanded strategic thinking and administrative capabilities that Maya was still developing. Linda, would you be interested in taking a more active role in the Foundation's leadership? Maya asked. We need someone with institutional memory and moral authority to guide our long-term strategic planning. Are you offering me a job, or are you looking for someone to take over so you can focus on other priorities? Both, I think. The Foundation needs leadership that understands why we're doing this work, not just how to do it efficiently, and I need to figure out what comes next in my own career. Maya realized that she was at another crossroads, similar to the moment 8 years earlier when she had discovered Harold's letter and had to decide whether to pursue dangerous truths or maintain comfortable ignorance. But this time, the choice wasn't about personal courage. It was about how to use the experience and relationships she had developed to create the maximum positive impact. 15 years later, Maya sat in her home office, reviewing applications for the Chen Fellowship Program, which provided financial support and mentorship for graduate students who wanted to specialize in government accountability and financial crime investigation. The fellowship had been established with proceeds from a book she had written about her experiences investigating criminal conspiracies, and it had quickly become one of the most competitive programs in the field. James knocked on her office door, carrying coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had just completed a successful research project. How did the interview with the Senate committee go? Maya asked. Very well. They're definitely going to recommend increased funding for whistleblower protection programs, and they specifically cited our research on the long-term effectiveness of the institutional reforms that followed the Helix Group case. Maya smiled, thinking about how their work had evolved from reactive crisis management to proactive policy development. Instead of waiting for criminal conspiracies to emerge and then trying to expose them, they were now focused on building institutional defenses that made such conspiracies more difficult to establish and maintain. Any interesting fellowship applications this year? James asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. Several. There's a young woman from Nigeria who wants to study how international criminal organizations exploit corruption in developing countries. A former military officer who's interested in investigating defense contractor fraud. And someone from your old alma mater who's proposing research on cryptocurrency manipulation by foreign governments. Maya had been running the fellowship program for 5 years, and she consistently found that each new class of students brought fresh perspectives and innovative approaches to problems she thought she understood completely. The intellectual stimulation of working with brilliant young researchers had proven to be as rewarding as her previous fieldwork, though significantly less dangerous. The cryptocurrency researcher sounds promising, James commented. That's going to be the next major frontier for international financial crime. I agree, but I'm also interested in the defense contractor proposal. We never fully investigated how deeply military procurement was compromised by the organizations we exposed. Maya's phone rang with a call from Agent Torres, who had been promoted to head the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and was now responsible for coordinating international investigations of the type they had pioneered during the Helix Group case. Maya, I need your advice on something, Torres said without preamble. We've uncovered evidence of a new criminal organization that's using techniques similar to the Helix Group, but they've adapted their methods based on lessons learned from our previous investigations. What kind of adaptations? More sophisticated money laundering, better operational security, and they're recruiting people with clean backgrounds to serve as fronts for their activities. They've essentially studied our playbook and developed countermeasures. Maya realized that this was inevitable. Criminal organizations were adaptive, and successful law enforcement techniques would eventually be met with improved criminal methods. The ongoing struggle between law enforcement and sophisticated criminals was fundamentally an arms race between competing innovations. "Do you need me to come back for active consultation?" Maya asked. "Not necessarily, but we could use some of your fellowship students as consultants. Their research projects might give us insights that our conventional investigators are missing." Maya appreciated Torres's recognition that the next generation of investigators might be better equipped to handle evolving criminal techniques than people like herself who had learned their skills during previous phases of the ongoing conflict. "I'll discuss it with the current fellows and see who might be interested in real-world application of their research." After Torres hung up, Maya realized that she had found the perfect synthesis of her different roles. She could continue contributing to active investigations through her students' work, while focusing her own efforts on the institutional development and policy research that had become her primary interests. James was reading over Section 5, Legacy and Resolution. The federal courthouse in Boston had never felt more imposing than it did on the morning Maya walked up its granite steps, carrying a briefcase full of evidence that could topple some of the most powerful people in America. Agent Torres walked beside her, both women dressed in their most professional attire, projecting confidence they didn't entirely feel as they prepared to present 22 years of secrets to a federal grand jury. The grand jury presentation took 6 hours. Maya found herself explaining complex financial transactions to a room full of citizens who were learning for the first time how sophisticated criminal organizations operated in the modern world. She walked them through bank records, wire transfers, and corporate filings, with the same methodical precision she had once used to analyze market trends for legitimate clients. But this presentation was different from any analysis she had ever given. Each number represented real suffering: drug overdoses funded by Helix Group trafficking operations, weapons sales that fueled conflicts in developing countries, human trafficking networks that destroyed families around the world. The abstract financial data she had worked with for years now had faces and stories attached to it. Agent Torres presented the law enforcement evidence: surveillance photographs, recorded conversations, witness statements from people who had been brave enough to speak truth to power despite the risks. Agent Mendez detailed the drug trafficking operations, showing how criminal proceeds were systematically laundered through legitimate businesses and political campaigns. Sarah Martinez's newspaper had published the first in a series of articles that morning, providing public context for what the grand jury was learning in private. The headlines were stark: "International Criminal Network used American businesses to launder billions," and "Government officials implicated in massive corruption scheme." The public reaction was immediate and intense. Protesters gathered outside the offices of companies identified in the articles. Congressional offices were flooded with calls demanding investigations. Stock prices plummeted for corporations connected to the Helix Group operations. But the Helix Group's response was equally swift and devastating. Maya's mother was arrested on charges of money laundering, with prosecutors claiming she had been aware of Harold's criminal activities and had participated in hiding illegal proceeds. The charges were obviously manufactured. Linda had never shown any awareness of Harold's secret activities, but they served their purpose of creating emotional pressure on Maya to reconsider her cooperation with the investigation. James received a visit from Treasury Department agents who claimed he was under investigation for helping Maya hide assets related to the Helix Group conspiracy. His bank accounts were frozen, his security clearance was revoked, and his employer was pressured to terminate his contract pending the outcome of the investigation. Dr. Wei, despite being in protective custody, was charged with immigration fraud based on documentation problems from his arrival in America 40 years earlier. Agent Torres was formally suspended from the FBI pending an internal investigation into her rogue activities and potential compromise by foreign intelligence services. The message was clear. Anyone who threatened the Helix Group would face the full weight of corrupted government institutions, and their loved ones would become collateral damage in a war they hadn't chosen to join. Maya found herself isolated in a safe house outside Boston, surrounded by federal marshals who weren't entirely sure whether they were protecting her from criminals or from their own government. The secure phone Agent Torres had given her rang constantly with updates that were alternately encouraging and terrifying. Some government officials were responding appropriately to the evidence. A federal judge in Virginia had issued sealed indictments against 12 individuals connected to the conspiracy. The Treasury Department had frozen over $200 million in suspected criminal assets. An international task force was being assembled to investigate Helix Group operations in other countries. But other parts of the government were actively working to suppress the investigation. The Justice Department had classified key evidence as related to national security, making it unavailable for prosecution. Several witnesses had disappeared into protective custody and were being held incommunicado. Media outlets were being pressured to limit their coverage of the story. "It's exactly what we expected," Agent Torres told Maya during one of their secure phone conversations. "The conspiracy includes people with the power to use legitimate government functions to protect criminal activities. They're going to fight this with everything they have." Maya learned that her role in the investigation had made her a target not just for retaliation but for recruitment. She received visits from well-dressed individuals who claimed to represent various government agencies, all offering her deals that would protect her family in exchange for her cooperation in, quote, containing the damage from her father's evidence. Ms. Chen, said a man who identified himself as Deputy Director Richardson from an agency he declined to name, "You've uncovered information that, while technically accurate, could cause significant harm to ongoing national security operations if it becomes public knowledge." Maya stared at him across the table in the safe house's kitchen, recognizing the polished rhetoric of someone who was used to convincing people that wrong was right. "You mean it could expose criminal activities that your agency has been protecting?" "I mean it could compromise legitimate intelligence operations that serve important American interests abroad. The people you're investigating may have engaged in questionable activities, but they also provide valuable services that help keep America safe. Services like drug trafficking and human smuggling? Services like intelligence gathering in regions where conventional diplomatic methods are ineffective. Sometimes moral compromises are necessary to serve larger strategic purposes." Maya realized she was listening to the same rationalization that had probably been used to justify protecting the Helix Group for decades. Criminal activities were reframed as intelligence operations. Corruption was redefined as pragmatic policy. Murder was characterized as necessary for national security. "What exactly are you offering me?" she asked. "Complete protection for you and your family. New identities, relocation to a secure location, financial support for as long as necessary. All you have to do is sign a document stating that you've reconsidered the evidence and now believe it was misinterpreted. And if I refuse?" Deputy Director Richardson's expression hardened slightly. "Then you'll discover how dangerous it can be to interfere with matters beyond your understanding." Maya looked around the safe house that had become her temporary prison, thinking about her mother sitting in a federal detention facility on manufactured charges, her best friend facing financial ruin for trying to help her, and all the other people whose lives had been destroyed by their association with her investigation. "I need time to think," she said. "You have 24 hours, Richardson replied, standing to leave. "After that, our ability to protect you and your loved ones becomes significantly more limited." That night, Maya lay awake staring at the ceiling of her temporary bedroom, weighing choices that would define not just her own future but potentially the future of everyone she cared about. She could accept Richardson's offer, trading the truth about her father's death for the safety of her family and friends. Or she could continue fighting a battle that had already cost too many lives and might ultimately be unwinnable. She thought about her father, David Chen, who had chosen truth over safety and paid with his life. She thought about Harold, who had spent 21 years protecting dangerous secrets while looking for the right moment to act. She thought about Agent Torres, Dr. Wei, and all the other people who had risked everything to ensure that powerful criminals couldn't operate with impunity. But she also thought about her mother, innocent of any wrongdoing but facing prison because of choices Maya had made. She thought about James, whose career and financial security had been destroyed because he had tried to help a friend in need. She thought about all the collateral damage that fighting for justice inevitably caused. The answer came to her not as a sudden revelation but as a gradual recognition of who she had always been. Maya Chen O'Sullivan was the daughter of two men who had chosen principle over safety, truth over comfort, justice over personal security. She had inherited more than their names. She had inherited their moral courage and their understanding that some fights were worth having regardless of the personal cost. She called Agent Torres on the secure phone. "I'm not taking their deal. Maya, you need to think carefully about this. They're not making idle threats." "I have thought about it. My father died for this evidence, and Harold spent 21 years protecting it. I'm not going to let their sacrifice be meaningless because I was too scared to see it through." "What about your mother? What about James?" "They became targets because the Helix Group is desperate to stop the truth from coming out. The only way to protect them in the long run is to make sure these criminals can't operate with impunity anymore." Agent Torres was quiet for a long moment. "Okay, then we finish what we started." The next phase of their campaign required coordination with allies they had cultivated outside the United States. Sarah Martinez had been working with investigative journalists in Europe who had been tracking Helix Group operations in their own countries. Agent Mendez had contacts in Latin American law enforcement who were eager to disrupt the drug trafficking networks that were poisoning their communities. Maya found herself at the center of an international effort that transcended the corruption of any single government. Evidence was simultaneously released in 6 different countries, making it impossible for American officials to suppress the story by classifying documents or intimidating witnesses. The Swiss government announced that it was freezing assets in hundreds of accounts connected to the Helix Group. The British authorities arrested 3 individuals who had been helping to launder money through London's financial district. The Mexican government requested extradition of American citizens who had been coordinating drug trafficking operations from luxury resorts in Cancun. The international pressure created political momentum that American officials couldn't ignore. Congressional leaders from both parties called for investigations. Editorial boards of major newspapers demanded accountability. Protest movements, organized demonstrations outside government buildings, and corporate headquarters. But the Helix Group's counterattack was equally coordinated and vicious. Maya's safe house was attacked by unknown assailants who were repelled only by the quick action of her Federal Marshal Protection Detail. Agent Torres's car was bombed, though she survived because she had been cautious enough to check for explosives before starting the engine. Dr. Wei was poisoned in protective custody, and survived only because medical staff were prepared for such an attempt. The violence escalated beyond anything Maya had anticipated, making clear that they were fighting people who would use any means necessary to protect their interests. But it also demonstrated the desperation of criminals who were finally facing real consequences for decades of protected criminal activity. The breakthrough came when Deputy Director Richardson made a critical mistake. In his eagerness to stop Maya's investigation, he attempted to recruit Agent Mendez as an ally by offering him information about DEA agents who had been compromised by the Helix Group. What Richardson didn't know was that Agent Mendez was recording their conversation as part of a larger investigation into government corruption. The recording revealed not just Richardson's connection to the conspiracy, but details about how the Helix Group had infiltrated multiple government agencies over a period of decades. Names, dates, specific operations, everything needed to understand how a criminal organization had gained the ability to use government resources to protect its activities. "Richardson just gave us the Rosetta Stone," Agent Torres told Maya excitedly. "With this recording, we can decode 20 years of seemingly legitimate government actions and show how they were actually serving criminal interests." The evidence from Richardson's conversation led to a cascade of revelations. Government officials who had been protecting Helix Group operations were identified and arrested. Corporate executives who had been facilitating money laundering were charged with federal crimes. Political figures who had been bought with criminal proceeds faced congressional investigations and criminal referrals. Maya watched the news coverage from her safe house, seeing her father's story finally being told to the American people. David Chen was posthumously recognized as a whistleblower who had died trying to expose systematic corruption. Harold O'Sullivan was acknowledged as a man who had spent decades protecting evidence while looking for the right moment to bring it to light. But the personal cost of their victory was enormous. Maya's mother spent 3 months in federal custody before charges against her were dropped, emerging traumatized by an experience that had aged her years in a matter of weeks. James lost his security clearance permanently and was forced to rebuild his career from scratch, though he never expressed regret about his decision to help Maya. Agent Torres was vindicated and promoted, but the stress of years of fighting corrupt colleagues had taken a toll on her health and her faith in the institutions she had devoted her life to serving. Dr. Wei was granted asylum in Canada, fearing that remaining in the United States would make him a permanent target for retaliation. Maya herself found that her old life was impossible to resume. Her career in financial analysis was over. No company would hire someone who had exposed the role of legitimate businesses in criminal enterprises. Her personal relationships had been strained by years of secrecy and danger. Her sense of security had been permanently altered by the knowledge of how easily powerful people could destroy the lives of those who threatened their interests. But she had also discovered capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. The investigation had revealed her talent for forensic analysis, her ability to see patterns in complex data, and her skill at coordinating complicated operations under pressure. Government agencies began offering her consulting contracts to help investigate other cases of financial crimes and corruption. Maya accepted a position with the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, where she could use her experience to help other investigators understand how sophisticated criminal organizations operated. Her first assignment was training other analysts to recognize the patterns she had learned to identify in Helix Group transactions. The most important thing to remember, she told a room full of federal agents during one of her first training sessions, is that these criminals aren't operating in a separate world from legitimate business and government. They've deliberately integrated their operations with legal activities to make detection more difficult. Maya showed them the same financial records she had analyzed in Harold's study, explaining how ordinary-looking transactions could conceal massive criminal enterprises. My stepfather's architectural firm appeared to be completely legitimate. But when you compare the payments they received to the actual work they performed, you can see systematic discrepancies that indicate money laundering. The agents listened intently as Maya walked them through techniques for following money through complex networks of shell companies and offshore accounts. But she also taught them something more important: how to maintain their integrity when investigating corruption that reached into the highest levels of government and business. You're going to discover that some of the people you trusted, some of the institutions you believed in, are compromised, she warned them. The temptation will be to either become cynical about everything or to ignore evidence that implicates people you respect. Neither response serves justice. Maya's new role gave her a sense of purpose that her previous career had never provided. She was helping to build systemic defenses against the kind of corruption that had killed her father and stepfather. Every case she helped solve, every training session she conducted, every analyst she mentored, was part of a larger effort to ensure that criminal organizations couldn't operate with impunity. But she also made sure that her father's specific case wasn't forgotten. Maya worked with Sarah Martinez to establish the David Chen Foundation for Government Accountability, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting whistleblowers and investigating government corruption. The foundation provided legal support, financial assistance, and security protection for people who were willing to expose wrongdoing despite personal risk. My father died because he believed that the truth was worth more than his own safety, Maya said during the foundation's inaugural press conference. This foundation exists to make sure that other people who make that same choice don't have to face the consequences alone. The foundation's first major case involved a Pentagon contractor who had discovered that military equipment was being diverted to criminal organizations overseas. Working with Maya's team, the whistleblower was able to expose the scheme while receiving protection that allowed him to survive the inevitable retaliation from powerful interests. Maya found deep satisfaction in using the investigative skills she had developed during her own case to help others seek justice. Each success felt like a small victory for her father and Harold, proof that their sacrifice had created lasting change rather than just temporary disruption of criminal activities. But she also remained realistic about the limitations of what they had accomplished. The Helix Group investigation had resulted in dozens of arrests and convictions, the seizure of hundreds of millions of dollars in criminal assets, and the disruption of international trafficking networks. However, Maya knew that other criminal organizations would eventually fill the void, using new methods and different networks to pursue the same profitable activities. "We won this battle," she told Agent Torres during one of their regular debriefing sessions. "But the war against corruption is never really over. There will always be people willing to trade public trust for private profit." "That's why we need people like you," Agent Torres replied. "People who understand how these systems work and are committed to defending democratic institutions against criminal infiltration." Maya had never thought of herself as a defender of democracy, but she realized that was exactly what she had become. Her investigation had been about more than solving her father's murder. It had been about preserving the integrity of the institutions that made justice possible in the first place. 6 months after the major arrests in the Helix Group case, Maya received a phone call that brought her investigation full circle. It was from Agent Torres, who had been contacted by another potential whistleblower, an accountant who had discovered evidence of a new criminal conspiracy involving government officials and corporate executives. "This case has some similarities to your father's situation," Agent Torres explained. "The accountant stumbled onto evidence of systematic corruption, and now he's afraid for his life. He specifically asked to work with the team that exposed the Helix Group." Maya realized that her father's death had created a legacy that extended far beyond her own investigation. The successful prosecution of the Helix Group had given other potential whistleblowers hope that it was possible to expose powerful criminals and survive the consequences. "What kind of evidence does he have?" Maya asked. "Financial records showing that foreign governments are bribing American officials to influence military aid decisions. It looks like it might be even bigger than the Helix Group case." Maya felt the familiar mixture of excitement and dread that came with the prospect of investigating powerful criminals. But she also felt the moral clarity that had sustained her through the darkest moments of her own case. "When do we start?" she asked. As Maya prepared for her next investigation, she thought about the conversation she had had with her mother the previous week. Linda had finally learned the full truth about Harold's secret activities and David's real death, information that had initially devastated her but ultimately helped her understand the men she had loved. "I'm proud of what you did," Linda had told her daughter. "Your father and Harold would be proud too. You finished what they started." Maya realized that her mother was right, but only partially. She had finished the specific investigation that had gotten her father killed, but she had also inherited a larger mission: the ongoing work of defending truth against power, justice against corruption, democracy against criminal infiltration. It was work that would consume the rest of her life, but it was also work that gave her life meaning in a way that her previous career never had. She was no longer just Maya Chen O'Sullivan, financial analyst. She was David Chen's daughter and Harold O'Sullivan's stepdaughter, carrying forward a fight that was larger than any individual case or investigation. The legacy of her father's sacrifice had created something that would outlast any single criminal organization or corrupt government official. It had created a network of people committed to the principle that some truths were too important to be suppressed, regardless of how powerful the people trying to suppress them might be. The federal courthouse steps felt like a mountain Maya had been climbing her entire life. As she walked toward the entrance, briefcase in hand, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that sterile hospital room where Harold died, to this moment where 22 years of secrets would finally see daylight. Agent Torres walked beside her, both women flanked by federal marshals whose presence spoke to the gravity of what they were about to reveal. Behind them, a carefully coordinated operation was unfolding across multiple cities. DEA agents were executing arrest warrants. Treasury officials were freezing bank accounts. International partners were seizing assets in 12 countries. The Helix Group's final desperate gambit had failed. Their attempt to discredit the evidence by claiming it threatened national security had backfired when Sarah Martinez's newspaper published detailed accounts of how that very excuse had been used to protect criminal operations for decades. Public outrage had forced politicians to distance themselves from anyone connected to the conspiracy. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her mother, watching the news. "I understand now why Harold was so worried those last few months. He was protecting us all along. I'm proud of what you're doing." Inside the courthouse, Maya found herself face to face with some of the most powerful people in America: senators, judges, corporate executives who had built their careers on a foundation of criminal proceeds. They looked smaller than she had expected, diminished by the weight of evidence that connected them to decades of corruption and violence. The grand jury presentation lasted 8 hours. Maya walked through financial records that told the story of how drug money had been transformed into political influence, how weapons trafficking had funded congressional campaigns, how human suffering had been converted into campaign contributions and judicial appointments. When it was over, the foreman of the grand jury stood and announced what Maya had been waiting 22 years to hear. "We find sufficient evidence to indict all 37 named defendants on charges of conspiracy, racketeering, money laundering, and murder." 3 months later, Maya stood once again at her father's grave in Mount Auburn Cemetery, but this time she wasn't alone. Dr. Wei was there, finally free to honor his old friend's memory. Agent Torres attended, having been promoted for her role in exposing the largest government corruption case in American history. James stood beside Maya, now her fiancé and partner in the consulting firm they had established to help other families navigate the aftermath of whistleblowing cases. "He would be proud," Dr. Wei said, placing a small stone on David Chen's headstone, a Chinese tradition Maya had never learned but now embraced. Maya looked at her father's name carved in granite, thinking about the price of truth and the cost of silence. The Helix Group was finished, but other conspiracies would emerge to take its place. Other families would face the choice between safety and justice. "Dad," she whispered, "I finished what you started." The fight for truth never really ended, but at least now she knew she wasn't fighting alone. Creating and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel.